Welcome to the Washington Week. I'm your host, Amy McHugh. This week, we're discussing the topic of presidential energy and if the president has garnered too much power over time. To discuss this, we have brought two of our best analysts, Sophie Azzullo, senior national correspondent of the New York Times, and Bobby, intern at Rapid Press. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
We're glad to have you. Now, let's just start with an opening question. Would you say that there are still legitimate checks on the power of the president in 2020? In other words, does the president have too much power today?
Well, let me just start off by saying I think the president has every right to the power he currently possesses. Federalist 70 really outlined the need for an energized, unified president. There was actually a debate when the Constitution was first written about whether a commission of several people or a single leader would be appropriate for the presidency. But Federalist 70 highlighted how a unified, powerful president allows for swift, decisive action in situations that are time-dependent or involve defense against foreign adversaries. As for if there are still legitimate checks on the president, I think the impeachment that just took place is a prime example of the fact that they are still around.
I'll have to respectfully disagree. The Constitution wanted to avoid concentrating too much power in an executive. They intended for Congress to handle important issues in an open debate. However, over the past 200 years, I believe that the president has gained too much energy in taking control of some powers intended for Congress. I'm not alone in this opinion, as we see in a letter written by 70 former U.S. senators. The letter cites issues that should be handled by the legislative branch, but instead have been ceded to the executive branch, such as regulating international trade, authorizing military force in hostile situations, and abusing the declaration of national emergencies. These are actions that should not be handled by one administration and require partisan debate, but that isn't happening today in 2020.
Sophie, what are your solutions for adding executive checks?
Well, rather than adding checks, I think it's important that we use the checks that we already have in place. For example, the War Powers Act gave Congress the power to check the executive, but they never enforced it because either they didn't want to take responsibility for the military actions or they were simply intimidated by the president. And when it comes to national emergencies, Congress has legislation that allows them to check and end any declared national emergency, which would allow them to put a limit on when the president can invoke certain statutory powers, but they have failed to convene once. The solution to limiting executive power is holding Congress responsible for checking it.
Thank you. Now, moving on, could you argue that the president needs more power to respond to current time-sensitive issues of today's time, such as the coronavirus, that is currently sweeping the nation?
Absolutely. I think the coronavirus is a great example of a situation where swift presidential actions are the precise course of action that could control the situation best. When there are countrywide issues that are beyond politics, such as this one, I see no reason for other political leaders to become involved in the decision-making process. The president should be able to evaluate the situation, consult with the correct experts, and carry out orders without having to draw out the decision-making process by speaking and negotiating with members of Congress. It simply takes far too long and involves too many people for proper action to take place in adequate time.
I think granting the president more power, even for special circumstances, can all too easily get out of hand. We saw this in Youngstown Steel versus Sawyer. Previously, FDR had seized property in the era of the New Deal, and he was allowed to do so because of special circumstances. The nation was recovering from the Great Depression. However, after FDR, the successive president, Harry Truman, then seized and operated the nation's steel mills. And when the Supreme Court reviewed his actions, they ruled that the president does not have the constitutional authority to take possession of private property. Granting excessive or allowing an abuse of an executive power, even for special circumstances, sets a dangerous precedent for the future of our country.
Bobby, where do you draw the line?
I think it's highly dependent on the situation. A president's power should fluctuate based on their responsibilities, and I think it's up to Congress to recognize when those situations are. If they see that the country needs to rally around the president and swift action is a necessity, they should have faith in the president to do what's right for the country. However, if it is a more political process, I trust that the president will consult members of Congress to make decisions. Ultimately, it's all about balance and people giving and taking responsibility when necessary.
That concludes our Washington Week. Thank you for joining us, Sophie and Bobby. I'm your host, Ava McHugh. Thank you for watching. Good night.